If you are just starting out with Blazor and want to actually code your first project, this video is for you. We will create a simple food menu web app project and you will learn various concepts, including how to set up the database, retrieve data from the database and display it in each component, create reusable components, work with component parameters, and much more. If you are transitioning from ASP.NET Core MVC to Blazor, this is the perfect project for you, because I will be converting my previous MVC web app project into a Blazor project. If you have seen that video, this will help you understand the differences, or you can find the link in the description if you haven't seen it and would like to. So let's get started. Well, welcome to Code the Future. This is Alan and I help you learn C# and .NET on your own. So the first thing that we're gonna need to do is just create a new Blazor web app project. And let me just go ahead and select the template here. I'll name it like menu app Blazor. Click on next. I'll leave everything as it is. And so that we have just like this basic template for Blazor. And the first step is going to be to set up our project, and our database. So we're going to create a couple of models, 3 models actually, with a many-to-many relationship between each other. We're going to need to create a context to connect these models to the database, and we're going to populate the database. So basically, this is not the most fun part of the project, but we have to do it. You can skip ahead if you are not interested in it, or if you know how it goes. But if you want to understand the full project, we're going to need to go through this process. And then afterwards, we're going to build the 2 components that basically 2 or 3 components that our project is going to have. So I'm just going right in the components folder here, in the pages folder. I want to delete the counter page because I don't need it. And the weather page here as well. But firstly, I'm just going to go and create the models, the models of our application, going to the root of the project here and adding a models folder. And first thing, the first model, so I'm adding a class. The first model, I'm going to name dish to display the dishes or like items of the menu. And I'll make it to have a public int ID property. Selecting a getter and a setter here for the property. Then we'll give it a string name property. I'll make it nullable here. I'm going to use also another string property for basically the image URL. So we are going to store in the database just the image URL. We're not going to store the images in a separate folder in our project, but just this is the quicker way. We're going to get the images this way in this project. So public string image URL. The last property I'm going to need is going to be the public double price for the price of our dish. And that's it for the first model for now. Let me just go ahead and add the second model, the ingredient model. So this is going to take a public int ID property and a public string name property. And we are basically going to make the relationship of these 2 models to be a many-to-many relationship, which basically means that one dish can have multiple ingredients and one ingredient can be part of many different dishes. For this reason, we're going to need a third model, like a middle model that is going to connect these 2 together. This is how this kind of relationship is basically done in ASP.NET Core, and I'm going to show you how this goes. So I'm going to create now the other model. I'll name it dish ingredient. And this model now will be connected to the dish model and to the ingredient model. So for this reason, he will connect the two models together. So I'm going to need firstly a public int dish ID property, and the public dish, which I'm going to name dish property. So these two properties basically connect this model to the dish model, and the other two connect it to the ingredient model. Public int ingredient ID property, public ingredient property. So I'm going to need to basically connect the dish and the ingredient model as well to this model. So I'm going firstly to the dish model and adding here public list of dish ingredients. I'll name it in plural ingredients, and I can make it here, this here nullable. I'm going to name it actually dish ingredients. And basically this tells us that one dish can be connected to many of this middle model, to the dish ingredients model, and then from that it will be connected to the ingredients actually. We'll see how this goes. But that's how you write this kind of relationship in ASP.NET Core, and we're going to need to input this property, the same property, to the ingredient model as well. And that was it for the models for now. We are going to, before we create the context, I'm going to go to dependencies actually to install the NuGet packages that we need for this project. The first one is Entity Framework Core. Let me find it. So this here. This helps us with the context. There are some, click on accept here. So we need this for different parts of the project and for the context as well, for some classes that we will import there. And then we go to search for tools here. We need the entity framework core.tools that has some commands to basically that help us migrate the models to the database. Click on accept. And then we need the SQL Server NuGet package because we'll connect our project to the SQL Server, to SQL Server Management Studio, and we'll install this as well. Okay, now that everything is installed, let me just go to the root of our project and add a data folder. We usually store the context inside the data folder. And here I'm going to add a class because the context is basically just a class. I'll name it like menu context. And here we have it. We need to basically import a DB context class, which is like a base class that is needed from the Entity Framework Core, the framework that we use here to connect our project to the database. Okay, I think I need to import Entity Framework Core on top of the page actually. So there we have it. The next thing we're going to need to do is just write a constructor. This takes the name of the class, menu context, and basically this will take here some generic parameters that are used to configure, to set the configurations for our context. You don't need to learn this by heart or anything. You just look this up in the documentations, but that's the reason why it takes this kind of parameters. So just what shows up here on the screen. Okay, after we have written the constructor as well, at each time we create a model in our database, we store its instance as a dbset instance in our context, and this is basically the instance that will be stored later on for each model in our database. So I'm just gonna first create a public dbset instance for our dish model. And it's a practice to name this in plural, so dishes. And I'm going to need to import the models on top of the page, the models directory. And next, I'm just creating a dbset instance for the ingredient model. I'll name it ingredients. And one last dbset instance for the dish ingredient model. I'll name it dish ingredients. Okay, here we have it. One last thing we're going to need to do this is when we have many-to-many relationship models, we need to specify the relationship in the context. So for this thing, I'm going to need to specify this in an onModel creating class, which basically specifies this relationship as soon as the models are created. So I'm writing here protected override void on model creating. That's the method actually we use in this case. And the first thing here, we specify the keys with which this middle model, the dish ingredient model, connects to the other two models. So for this reason, I'm going to need to write here model builder dot entity for the dish ingredient entity that has key, sorry. I write a variable here, di for dish ingredient, and then the new keyword I'll open up some curly braces here. Okay, and here we specify the keys of the other two models. So the dish ID key and the the ingredient ID, which is a property that this middle model uses to connect to the dish and to the ingredient model. We need a semicolon here. Okay, I need a parenthesis after this part. And what did I forget there? Dish ingredient, this was DI actually. Just a shortage, we could leave it as that. And here we specify this relationship more specifically here. So I'm going to need this model builder dot entity, which is for the, again, for the dish ingredient entity or model. We specify that here, that with this dot has one method, that each dish that with many di to di dot dish ingredients. So basically each dish can be connected to many dish ingredients. And the key with which this dish connects with the dish ingredients model is, we specified here, has foreign key. Okay, two dots there. Key. Here we specify the foreign key, which was the dish ID. And just this way we'll specify the relationship of the dish ingredient model to the ingredient model, that one ingredient can be connected to many dish ingredients with a specific foreign key. And let me just change here the ingredient, the name of the ingredient model here, with can be connected with many dish ingredients, and the foreign key will be the ingredient ID. Okay, that was all for our context. So basically here we specified the constructor, we specified the relationship between the models and this dish ingredient model. All this, basically we specified the many-to-many relationship here and the dbset instances for each of our models. Now the part is that we're going to need to create a database instance. So let me just go to view here, Server Explorer. If I click here on data connections with the right of the mouse, add a connection. No, create new SQL Server database, because we're going to need to create a database for the project. I'm going to need to take the server name by going to SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so this is the server name. Let me just copy it and paste it here. I'm going to select here to encryption equals to optional or false, so that we do not have to connect to the database with a password or so. Click on Trust Certificate, and I'll name the database to menu app menu Blazor underline data. The database will be created right now, and we should see the physical address of the database, or what we call a connection string, in this panel here. Let me just copy this. We're going to need to store it in the app settings.json file of our project. Let me go there. Here, I'll write the connection strings. Here, we'll give a name to the connection string. I usually name it like default connection string. And here we just need to write the actual connection string, what we copied before. Did I miss something here? I missed a colon here. And this should work right now. The last thing is that we need a service to connect, a service for our context in the program.cs file, so that we connect the context to our database. Here, where we write the services, I'm gonna need to write builder.services .add db context. I think I'm going to need to import entity framework core on top of the page or something. Maybe not right now. Let me just write here the name of the context. Here we'll specify the options. Let me just import the directory for our context, the data directory. And here in the options, I'm just going to need to specify options that use SQL Server. So we'll connect our context to the SQL Server, and inside parentheses here, we're going to need to get the value of our connection string, basically the physical address of our database. And we'll get it by writing builder.configuration.get connection string. And here we write the name of our connection string, which we named get default connection string. I think I'm missing a parenthesis there. And the semicolon. So that was the last thing that we needed. Let me run the project so that we don't have any error, and then we're just gonna need to migrate the changes to our database. Well, here's this, our basic Blazor web app project. There was no errors, so we can migrate the changes to the database. So I'm just going to Package Manager console here and add the migrations to the database. So basically the structure of our database with the models and everything will be stored in the database right now. I'm just going to name it like initial migration. Enter, and then hit enter. Build succeeded, as we can see. And we can just update the database. Okay, everything was updated to our database. Everything seems fine. Now let me just go to our database, because actually I'm gonna populate the data that we have here manually, so it saves us time. And actually that's what I did in the MVC project as well, because that's the purpose of this tutorial, just to see how we can show data to our page. We could do it also in the code, in the context there, or in a separate file. We could add the data, but I'm just gonna do it manually here. So let me find the Blazor menu data. I think it was menu Blazor underline data. Just let me check. This should be empty because I've worked several projects actually. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna cut this part so that the video doesn't take too long. I'm just gonna populate these 3 tables with some data, and I'm gonna show you what I did. Just the part that you're gonna need to know so that you don't misunderstand it is if I just build a menu of pizzas, pizza margherita. I'm gonna go to the photo, and I'm gonna just need to get the, let me turn this to English, get the image by writing copy image address here, by getting the image address here by clicking on copy image address. Okay, so I'll cut this part and I'll just be with you shortly. So we are just back. I just created these 3 pizzas in the first table, and then in the ingredients table I created 4 ingredients, and you can see that each one of these has an ID, as dishes also had. And then in the dish ingredients table I connected, so to say, the dish with the ID of 2, which was the margherita pizza, with the ingredient with the ID of 1, the dish with the ID of 2, so the margherita pizza, I gave it the ingredient with the ID of 1 and the ingredient with the ID of 2. So basically just tomato sauce and cheese. And that's how I basically proceeded for the other pizzas. That's how I connected each dish to their ingredient. Just so that you know what I did. And now we'll go to the most exciting part of the project, actually the building of our components. This is when we code in Blazor. I hope you knew basically how to do the stuff until now, because you have to know ASP.NET Core before you start learning Blazor. But yeah, I hope it's more interesting from now on. So let's go to the components, to pages. Here we have left the Home.razor component, which I'm gonna keep, because here we are gonna display all of our dishes, just like a menu basically. And I'm just gonna remove this part here, the page title, I'm gonna leave it to home. This component is actually a routable component because we are using this page directive here, and in the root directory of our project, we'll get routed to these components. So I'm actually gonna write here the code block where we write our C# code. And here, basically what we're going to do, we're going to take the data from the database and we're going to store it in a list. So I'm going to create a private list of dishes. I'll make it nullable and I'll name it like dishes in plural. I'm going to need to import the models directory on top of the page, just like that. And now that I have this list of data, actually I'm going to use a method, which is like a method that is called as soon as a component is initialized. So this onInitialized async method, just like a standard method for Blazor components. We're going to write it here, protected override async task, because we're going to make an asynchronous call to the database. And the name of it is onInitialized async. Okay, just like that. And now in this dishes list, I'm gonna await the data from our context, from our database, but I'm gonna use the context. For this reason, I'm gonna need to inject the context actually on top of our page by writing this @inject directory. The name of our project, which is menu app Blazor data menu context. And just so it is easier for us to use during the project, I'm going to give it a name here of db. So I'm going to access the context by just writing db here, and I'm going to access the dishes that this context has with this dishes instance, db instance that we created before, if you remember. And now we're going to use the toList async method to get all of the data, basically to list all of the dishes from our database. And we're going to need to import Entity Framework Core on top of the page, I guess, right now, to use this toList async method. Okay, so until this point, we are getting all of these dishes from the database, storing it here, and now we're gonna use it above. We're gonna display it above. Okay, so I'm gonna put all of the content inside the div. I'm giving it a container class, which is just a bootstrap class to center the content of the page. And then I'm gonna use another div block here with the other bootstrap class of a row, basically to store the items inside the row, inside the bootstrap row. It's just a way to represent and style the elements on the page. And I'm gonna make like an if condition here. So in case the dishes list is null, we will actually display on the page like a paragraph saying dishes are loading ... So this happens when the component is not rendered fully. And in the else clause here, we're going to display all of the dishes that we have. So I'm actually going to use a for each loop. So for each, I'll take a variable for a singular dish in the dishes, which is this list that we have here. For each dish in the dishes list, I'm actually now we could access each dish just in this part here, but I'm gonna create a DishCard component, because that's the meaning of Blazor. In Blazor, we use reusable components so that we can use in different places. That's the best way to write code in Blazor. So I will create now just a component to display each dish in our home page. And then that component I'm going to use here. So basically here then we'll write DishCard, just the component like this one. So let's just go ahead and create this DishCard component. So to the pages here, I'm gonna add an razor component. I'll name it DishCard. And here we have it, DishCard component. I'm not gonna need this title there. I'm just gonna begin with the code block here, the C# code block here. In order to give data to components in Blazor, we actually do it by giving them a parameter. Parameters are like properties that we use for this exact purpose to give data when we use later on the component somewhere else in our application. So I'm just gonna use this data annotation here, parameter, and write the property to be a public dish. I'll name it dish. Since this is a property, this needs a getter and a setter. And we'll need to import on top of the page here the models folder. So this dish model is known here. Okay, and actually we're gonna need to make this parameter to be required. How we'll do this is that actually we write here after the parameter in the data annotation here, we write another attribute which is editor required. So this will give us an error if when we use the component later on, we don't give it a parameter. And we're gonna actually initialize this parameter, the property, to give the default value and then an exclamation mark at the end. What this basically does, this initializes our property to a null, but this data annotation that we gave above doesn't allow us that we leave it as a null. We need this actually because we're gonna get errors. We're gonna get this null reference errors later on. That's the way to actually write a parameter in Blazor when we want it to be required. Anyway, maybe that's new for you. It seems complicated, but it's like a standardized, just like a standard way to write it. Now we are just gonna, here we're gonna display the dish. So I'm gonna need like another set of div tags. I'll give it a class of column 12. This is a bootstrap class, basically gives this div the entire space of a row, because a row in bootstrap has 12 places, but we're going to want to make it so that when the screen is larger, it's like medium or larger, we're going to give this div 6 out of 12 possible places, so basically half of the space. This may seem a lot, but that's just bootstrap styling that I'm doing right now. We're just displaying the data on our page. So that's not that complicated actually as it may seem. And I'm gonna center the content and the div that this div has in the center. That's what this class here does. Okay, I'm gonna need to have 4 separate divs. In the first one, I'm just gonna use a header to display the name of the dish. I'll access it. We'll get it from the parameter. So we're gonna access it by writing @dish.name. And we're gonna take an image tag. This image tag in the source attribute. We'll take the dish.image URL. I'll style it to take like, let's say set the width to the 70% of the div. And actually images usually take an alternative attribute, which basically prints a message when the image is not loaded yet. I'm just gonna write there the name of the image. So I'm just gonna take this, the dish.name, but that's not necessary. So let's say to write it, to give it this specific name. Anyways, let's go now to the third div where we'll write the price of the dish. So at dish.price.toString. So toString is basically a method that formats how the price will be displayed. And if I just a formatting method this is, and if I write here and2, this basically just means that the price will be displayed with 2 places after the comma. And I'll just write $, here afterwards. The fourth div, the last thing we need for this component, is that we need like an anchor tag. I'll give it a class of like a button and a button info. And in the href attribute, I'm gonna specify the route to go to the details page of each dish. So here I'm just gonna specify using the at here. And then use the string interpolation here to write the address of the route. So just details, and then here I'm gonna write the at dish.id, because this is how we'll specify the details pages. This is how we write the reference link in our anchor tags. I think it's correct, but we'll need to see it later on again. And here inside this anchor tag, I'm gonna write a text to be inside this anchor tag, like view the dish or view dish. So here we have just displayed how this component will look. And so we'll get the data from a parameter, and then we display it here, and we're gonna go back to the home page and see how we will use it. So here we're gonna need to write an attribute to take, we're gonna need to specify what kind of parameter this DishCard component takes, and this we're gonna be this dish that we get from the database. So we got the dishes from the database here. We're looping through them, and we'll create a DishCard component, each one of them taking one dish. That's how you actually write reusable components in Blazor. Let me run the project to see if everything is working correctly. And here we have it. We have the 3 pizzas that we had stored in our database displayed using the DishCard components. So we have the name of them, the image, the price in the format that we wrote there, and the button that will redirect us to the details page of each dish, which we haven't created yet. There we will see the ingredients as well for each pizza, for each dish. But that looks pretty fine right now. So we use the reusable code to present different parts of the web UI. And one last thing I'm going to need to show you for this homepage is that just as it stands, the homepage that we have here, as it is, it's using static server-side rendering to display the content of the page. But usually in pages where we make an asynchronous call to a database, to an API or something like that, we want to display data to the user as soon as we get it. So basically this loading, dishes are loading, ... we want it to be displayed in the beginning, and when all of the data is loaded from the server, then the DOM will be updated afterwards. We do not see here the delay basically when we go to the page. If we load the page again, this happens so fast and we do not see a delay or anything. But if I'm gonna simulate here like a longer database call with the await task.delay method, so we'll delay the page load with like a second. Run the application one more time. Okay, if I try and refresh the page, you see that this takes a while and then it loads. It takes a while and then it fully renders. Let me just make it 2 seconds so that we see it better. So if I try and refresh now, this takes 2 seconds and then it refreshes. 2 seconds and then it refreshes, but that's not that user-friendly. For this reason, in this kind of components or pages, I'm going to need to use the streaming rendering. So I'm going to need to write the attribute streaming rendering here. And stream rendering, sorry. And what this will do, we'll see for a couple of seconds this message and then we'll see the dishes. So we are just simulating the delay here with this method because we don't have that much data from the database. But in case we were doing a long asynchronous call from the database, this would be really necessary. So I'm going back again there. And we see this dishes loading for 2 seconds. And then we receive the data, we receive the other remaining part of the content. Now we are just gonna need to create the details page to see the details for each of the dishes that we have. So here at the components folder, the pages, I'm gonna add a new Razor component. I'm naming it Details. And here's the component. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to delete this part and I'm going to make our component a routable component as well by writing this page directive and we're specifying the route to the route of the component, which is going to be details / then we actually have the option to write route parameters. This way we take data from the route and we can then attach them to a component parameter. In this case, we can take an ID. We're going to take an ID from the route. I'm opening up curly braces here, and I'll name the data that will take ID. And we can specify a constraint for the data that we take from the route. For example, if I write colon here and int, we specify that this needs to be the ID that we take from the route needs to be an integer. We could use the question mark afterwards to make this part of the route optional, but in this case, this is going to be needed so that we access a specific dish. So I'm just going to remove the question mark there. And right now, I'm just going to go back to the code block here to basically specify the parameter, the component parameter with the same name. So I'm just writing the parameter data annotation here, and I'm writing the property public int ID. So this will take the value of the route parameter that has the same name. And this is basically case insensitive, so this will be connected to one another. This needs to begin with a / as well, our route. The next step then is that we're going to filter through the database to find the dish with this specific ID. And we're going to take it and store it in a dish variable, which I'm going to declare here. Type should be dish. I'll make it nullable and I'll name it dish. So for this reason, I'm gonna need to import the models folder one more time in this page. That models, we see that the error goes away. And now the uninitialized async method. So protected, override, async task, uninitialized async. And what we're gonna do in this dish variable that we created, we're gonna store what we'll take from the database. I'll use the await keyword to await the information. Then I'm gonna need to inject the database here. I'll take it from the home page. So I'll import entity framework core as well. So db.dishes will loop through the dishes in our database, and here I'm gonna write the method first or default async, and I will loop through the database for dish to have the ID which is equal to the ID parameter that we have here. Afterwards, we can make an if check here to check if the dish is null. You can just redirect to navigation manager. Navigate to the not found page. And we're using here the navigation manager, which is built in Blazor. I'm gonna need to import it on top of the page. I need to inject the navigation manager. And as I used it there, I'm writing a name here, which I use to access it. So just one last thing. So here we are taking actually the dish from the database that has the ID that we get from the route. But one thing that would cause us an error here is that we want to display not only the information for the dish, but also its ingredients. To basically make this possible, because the dish has a many-to-many relationship with the ingredient model, we need to write here, after we access the dishes, we need to write the include method to include firstly dish ingredients model, and then I'm gonna need to write the then include method to include the ingredient. So we are accessing the ingredient by accessing firstly the dish ingredient model and then the ingredient, and then we make the check for the dish that we are searching for. Let me just indent this a bit more. Well, that was it for our method. Now we are just gonna write the code to display all of this in the details page. So I'm gonna write a div to store the entire content inside of it. I'm gonna basically just write an if statement to check if the dish is equal to null. We're just gonna write a paragraph with a loading ... text inside. And if that's not the case, I'm just gonna take a div to display all of our content. I'm giving it a container class. and also a class of text center to center everything in the center of the page. And I'm gonna need to have here 4 divs. I think I'm gonna import some from the home page because they are basically the same from the DishCard component. Actually, we could do a separate reusable component for the details page, but we're just displaying it this way. And I'm gonna take this part the button as well. We'll make a few changes there to display the ingredients as well. So we have the dish name, which we can access. We're accessing it from this variable that we have there. So the dish name here for the image. And here we'll make it the image to be 50% of the container. Okay, we'll modify it here. We'll redirect the page here back to the menu. We're here just gonna redirect to the root page. And we are gonna need like a one last div to display, as I already said, the ingredients. So for us to be able to do that, I'm just gonna write here ingredients, colon, and then I'm gonna use an unordered list, an HTML list. I'll basically remove this styling so that it doesn't have these bullet points actually. List style type to none. And here inside, I'm going to use a for each loop. In the for each loop, I'm going to loop through each item in the dish ingredient, dish ingredients. We need to write the add keyword before. Okay, so we'll loop through each dish and we will store in a list element then the item dot ingredient dot name. So this is the way how we access the ingredient name by accessing the dish ingredient model of the dish. This is it for the details component. Let me run the project one last time. Okay, this will take a bit to load since we have still that task.delay method active. Okay, we have our dishes. If I click on view dish, we see the pepperoni dish. The image is 50% of the width of the page. We see the price. The ingredients of the pepperoni pizza are tomato sauce and pepperoni. And we have the option to go back to the menu. So we have displayed each detail of the dish together with the ingredients of it that we didn't have in the first page. So the dishes are loading. Let me go to the vegetarian pizza view dish. We see that the vegetarian pizza costs $17 and the ingredients are tomato sauce and vegetables. So this was actually our project. We could delete this left panel because this is not, we're not using it in this case. We could just go back to the component, to the layout, to the main layout, and just comment out this part, the navigation menu. But yeah, I'm just gonna leave it as it is for now. I hope you got value from this video. However, if you want to learn more about any specific Blazor topic, you should go ahead and watch my other videos from the Blazor series, which you can see on the screen. Alternatively, if you want to know the next steps to take in your C# and .NET journey, you should check out my .NET C# developer roadmap, which is also linked on the screen. I appreciate you watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed the content and subscribe to the channel if you are new. I will catch you guys in the next video then. Have a great day.